Hi class, we've created our little Access database and now we're going to make a Visual Studio C# application that utilizes that database, and we're going to be using the ADO.NET data provider classes from Visual Studio. These data provider classes give us the ability to connect to many different types of databases like Access and Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, and as long as the data provider, creates these classes to enable access to their database, we can use the ADO.NET data provider classes to have consistent access to any different type of database. We'll be using this small flowchart to catalog our choices for our ADO.NET data provider capabilities for this application as we go along. Here's and I'll show you where to get it, don't worry. Here is the application that we'll be creating this first go round. We're going to have a small form that loads up with an empty list box. When we click the Load Data button, we will connect to the database and pull all of the data from our member table to display. So let's open Visual Studio and get started. I'm going to check my TFS connection. Always fun, fun, fun. Looks like I'm still connected to the appropriate data source. So I'm going to create my new project. This is going to be a Windows Forms app. I don't have to specify any special kind of application to access the ADO.NET data providers, so I can do that from any sort of application. I want to set my location, and I'm going to name this application DB, and we're going to call it our Access Member Table. Now, as we create applications for this section, we'll try to keep them organized somewhat so that you can refer back to them to find sample code. I'm going to update my form characteristics. Let's see, we'll call this our Access Member Table. And I want to set a back color. And of course, anytime we're creating several different small applications like we will in this chapter, it's nice to use some different back colors so that they stand out as different from each other. I'll make my forecolor, let's see, something that hopefully I can see. And fix my font. I think the bread's done, huh? Do you think it'll stop? We'll see. Oh, it stopped. I don't know if you could hear it. Now, for our list here, we're going to start out with a list box. That's not a list box. There's a list box. And I'm going to name my list box LSTBX members. And I think that my form is a little awkward. A little bit longer so that I can have this button down here. And my button is going to be BTN Road. And it will say Load Data. Fix my back color. And I'll do a save all. Looks good. I don't think there's anything else that we need. How about a label down at the bottom is a message? Whenever we're working with a database, we are working with external resources, so we do have a chance of running into issues with the database, connectivity problems, network problems, things like that. So let's set up a message label at the bottom of our screen. I'm going to name it LBL message, and I will start out with it saying some text like welcome to member list. Oh, good. All right, so in our application, let's take a look at our code. First of all, we're going to be concerned with the namespaces that we're using. I'm going to get rid of some of these extras. We know we need system and system.windows.forms because this is a forms application. We need to use a specific namespace depending on what ADO.NET data provider we're using. We're going to be using the data provider for Microsoft Access, and it is system.data.OLEDB. So for Microsoft Access, we need to make sure that we have that data provider. There are some other namespaces, of course, in that system.data namespace, different namespaces for different types of databases. So lots of different ways for us to connect to them. After we specify our data provider, we need to specify how we want to connect to that provider. If you look in the material in your textbook, you'll be walked through several different scenarios, trying some different SQL statements and different items, but nothing really that is a specific application. So let's create that as a specific application. And in our application, one thing that we're going to need is a class definition for our member object. We created a table for that member object. That's great. Now we need a class definition to go along with that. So let's add a class. And this is going to be our member class. And in our member class, let's get rid of some of these unnecessary using clauses. We're going to be defining the structure for our member table. First, our private class fields. We made that ID a string. The first name is a string. The last name is a string. And the phone number. Now I'm going to create my constructors. You know how I am with our videos. I like to save some time here, but I do like to still use the fields because we are learning. So I'm going to generate some constructors here, and of course it's using the Visual Studio 2017 Liam.expression style, C# 6.0, which wasn't available before that. So remember, if you're looking at some old code, you're not going to see things like that. And then the end of that region. Now, as we look at our fields and our properties, we should have everything accounted for that has a column in our table. We really want things to kind of match up. Now we need our constructors. First, our default new R constructor. Next, we're going to create a constructor that takes the first name and the last name. And of course, I'm setting my class fields, my instance variables, equal to the parameter fields that were passed to me in this constructor. In our class development, as we look at our class, we want to add an override for the toString. And let's return some information about our member. And we'll just send back their first name and their last name. That's going to be the end of our methods region. And our class looks pretty good. Now, in our class, if you were looking at your textbook, you would see that they would like this class to be a read-only class. So in other words, we're not going to be updating the database. So we don't need any setters. No updates. So let's fix my comments. That is read-only. Now, I want to add just a couple more things here to finish up this class. Here's our default no R constructor. Here is our constructor that populates name fields. All right. And then up at the top, I want some documentation for my class. So for my class, this class defines a student member. We should be all set here. I'm going to save all again. And now we have our class structure built that matches our database. I'll go ahead and do some other maintenance activities for my project. I'm going to rename program.cs and name it name class. And I'm going to rename my form1.cs and name it form member. And hope that it fixes everything for me so I don't have a big mess, right? Now we should be in good shape. Let's run our application. Make sure we don't have any errors. Wow, good, good. All right. So as we look at our application, we're going to be setting up our connection to the database. So let's do that first. Kind of looking here to see how we want to do it. Now, as we create these components that we're looking at in our project, I'd like to keep track of them on this data grid control flowchart document. If you look at Canvas, you'll see this document available to you at the beginning of this week's module to go ahead and download. It is set up as a protected form so that we can only type in these certain areas so that you don't have to worry about the rest of it. I'm going to set this over to the side of my screen here. And I want to already make an update. First of all, when we started out our application here, we decided that the type of database we were going to be using was an access database. So we saw that we need to include a certain library namespace. System.data.oledb. So I'm going to put that over here because that basically defines the type of database that we're using. Now, the next thing I want to put in this section, I'm going to do a Shift Enter. Oh, it didn't work. I was hoping that it would let me just update that section. If I press Enter, what does it do? Nothing. Okay, well, we just might have to smush this up. We'll see how it works for us. Now, the next thing I want to know is that it's going to be the MemberTable.mdb, which stands for Microsoft Database. So we'll see if that's going to, it doesn't work very good. You silly thing, you're supposed to stay over there. Well, my text fields might not work as well as I was hoping. We're always trying with technology though, right? Okay, so now I know that my database itself is using the OLEDB library namespace, and it's named MemberDB.mdb for Microsoft Database. So now I'm ready to actually form the connection to my database. So I want to look at my form code. So let's take a look at our form and design mode. The only actual event procedure that we're going to have is our load data button. Some of the controls that we're going to declare at the class level. So let's do that. Get this spread out as much as I can. And in our form class, we want to declare some class fields. And of course, you can use the # region compiler directives in your form class also. The first thing that I need to declare is my OLEDB connection. I'm going to name it DBCONN. So now in my document, I can click here and my connection is named DBCONN. That's what I wanted to keep track of there on that flowchart. Now my connection says that it needs a command object to read from it. So I'm going to set up that OLEDB command object, and it's going to be named DBCMD. So again, I can put that on my flowchart. Now my command object is controlled by a data adapter or a data reader object. In this particular instance, we're going to use a data reader. And we want to name this DB reader. I'm going to put that here on our flowchart. Now, our reader is going to control what data is accessed from the database so that we can decide how we want to use it. We may access that data by using a data set or a data grid, We can also access it directly. So let's see how we're going to do it this time. We've declared all of these objects. I'm going to maximize this and leave our data source flowchart behind. I want to create a couple of more class fields here. So after our reader, let's create an instance of our member class. We'll call it a member. And then let's create a string. And this is going to hold the string that says how to connect to our database. Our connection string. One more, we're going to have a string that holds the actual SQL command. Now let's comment each of these. So we'll be using these different strings as we build these objects and try to access the database. So let's go now back to our form and double click on our button to create our event procedure for that button click event. The first thing that I want to do is create our connection. So we're going to set up our connection string to be equal to the string that's required to connect to Microsoft Access. We are given this information in our textbook, but if you weren't aware of what connection string was required, you would have to do some research. If you get online and start searching for the database you're working with and ask for a connection string, you're probably going to find some information fairly easily, but you might have to do some research. Now for Microsoft Access, we're going to require the provider parameter, and our provider is going to be Microsoft.ace.oledb.12.0. After that parameter, I have a semicolon. That's part of the required syntax for this connection string. Next, I need to specify the data source. And the data source is going to be our MemberDB. And it's .accdb. I messed that up on the flowchart. Let's fix it. accdb. Access database. The MDB was the older version. Now, after our data source parameter, we do not need a semicolon because that's the end of our connection string. So I do need a semicolon outside of the connection string to end our C# statement. Now, after we've built our connection string, we can instantiate our DB connection object. It's a new connection, and we want it to use our connection string. After we've instantiated that DB connection object, we can use it to open our connection to the database. So just like when reading a sequential file, we must open the database or open our connection. Now, this is a very small amount of code, but let's get started and see what we can do. I mentioned earlier that when we're working with a database, we're likely to encounter errors. So we always want our code to be enclosed in a try catch. So let's set up our try for this code. So we're going to try to create this connection, and if we can't, we're going to catch that exception so we can find out what went wrong. If we don't catch that exception, we'll never know. So let's catch any exception as an exception object named EXC. If we get that exception, we're going to update our label to display the message from that exception object. All right, so now I have my application pretty well created. When somebody clicks the load button, we're just going to try to open our database connection. So let's run our program. Load data. Oh, now the first error that I've encountered is this message: the Microsoft.ace.ole DB 12.0 provider is not registered on the local machine. Now I'm going to look, because in our textbook they actually mention that. Let's see if I can get myself back to a regular size here and search the database. Let's try to bring this over to show you. So in our textbook, they actually mention this. If you're running examples on a 64-bit processor and get this error, you may need to install a new driver. At the time the book was written, you could read about the problem and find the download at this link. So I'm going to trust our textbook here and copy that and see if I can open that link. No, of course not. So we're going to have to do some searching, huh? Well, here's a Stack Overflow article about it. Let's see, there's a bunch of answers. Oh, this is a good one. You need to install it. You're looking for the 2007 Office System Driver Data Connectivity Components. All right, let's try that link. That looks good. Yep. It looks like it's got all of our OLE things. Okay, download the file, double click the Access Database Engine. So let's download it. And of course, if you don't have this problem, you should update your computer or Windows or something, because you should have a 64-bit machine at this point in time. You're running a pretty slow one. All right, so it says it's done. Not take effect until your computer has been restarted. Would you like to restart now? Well, I guess I will, and I'll be right back, and we'll keep going.